She drove past her best friend's highway exit last month and had to pull over, gripped by a grief she wasn't expecting, for someone who is very much still alive.
Dear Mia.
Episode 3. The Friend Who Isn't Gone.
Mia.
Before we start, one honest thing. I'm not a therapist, and nothing here is a substitute for one. What I am is someone who's spent years writing and living the long, unglamorous middle of marriages, the part after the wedding and before whatever comes next. So take this as one person's honest attempt at an answer, not a professional prescription. Let's get into today's letter.
Dear Mia.
I've written and abandoned this letter in my notes app probably 6 times, always right before bed, which is maybe telling in itself. My best friend and I have known each other since we were 11. We were the kind of close where we didn't need plans. We just showed up at each other's houses. She was my maid of honor. I was hers 2 years later. Then she had a baby and I didn't yet, and something shifted that neither of us caused on purpose. Now she has 2 kids and I have none by choice, and we live 40 minutes apart instead of 4 blocks, and our text threads have gone from constant to occasional to lately mostly logistics about when we might see each other, which somehow never actually happens. Last month I drove past her exit on the highway and felt this wave of grief that surprised me, like I was mourning someone who hadn't died. I had to pull off at the next exit and just sit in the car for a few minutes before I could keep driving, which has never happened to me over a friendship before, and it scared me a little, honestly, how much it hit. We still say we should get together every few weeks and mean it every time. I don't think either of us did anything wrong. I think we just became different kinds of busy. But I don't know if this is a normal thing that happens to every friendship eventually, or if it's a sign we're actually losing each other, and I'm the only one who's noticed, and I don't know how to ask her which one it is, without sounding like I'm accusing her of something. The detail I keep coming back to is the highway exit, that you weren't even thinking about her. You were just driving, and the grief arrived on its own, uninvited, which tells me this isn't really a question about whether the friendship is fine. You already know something's off. What you're actually asking is whether it's allowed to be off without it being anyone's fault, and whether naming it out loud will make it worse or finally make it better. I think it's worth answering both parts plainly right up front before we go any deeper. Yes, it's allowed to be off without either of you having done anything wrong, and no, naming it honestly is far more likely to help than hurt, even though it doesn't feel that way from where you're sitting right now. Here's the thing about friendships like yours, the 11 years old, no plans needed kind. They were built inside a specific set of conditions, proximity, unstructured time, roughly matching life stages, and it's easy to mistake the friendship itself for the thing that made it feel effortless. The effortlessness wasn't actually about how much you loved each other. It never had to work hard because the conditions were doing the work for you. For blocks away, no kids, no calendars to coordinate. Of course, it didn't need maintenance. What's happening now isn't that the love changed. It's that the conditions that used to carry it for free have quietly disappeared, and you're both discovering, at the same time, that you never actually learned how to maintain a friendship on purpose, because you never had to. I think it helps to picture the specific machinery that used to do this work for you, because it makes the current gap feel less like a mystery and more like an engineering problem. At 11, you were quite literally down the street from each other, with almost total control over your own afternoons and no responsibilities heavier than homework. At the wedding stage, you were still both mostly organizing your lives around your own preferences, with flexible schedules and few people depending on you. Every one of those conditions functioned like free infrastructure underneath the friendship. Proximity did the work of seeing each other, flexible time did the work of making plans, and shared life stage did the work of always having something to talk about, all without either of you lifting a finger to build any of it on purpose. Now, every single piece of that infrastructure is gone at once. She has 2 small kids whose needs organize her entire week without her consent. You live 40 minutes apart, which sounds small until you factor in that 40 minutes each way, around 2 nap schedules and a partner's own commitments, can functionally be as far as another state. None of that means the friendship weakened. It means the free scaffolding fell away all at once, and nothing has been built yet to replace it, because nobody warned either of you that you'd eventually have to. That's actually good news, even though it doesn't feel like it, because it means the question isn't, are we drifting apart because something broke? It's, do we know how to build a friendship that requires effort, when for 20 years we only knew how to have one that didn't? Those are very different problems. The first one is often unfixable. The second one is just a skill neither of you has needed until now, and skills can be learned badly, and then learned better. I'd also point out that you've actually already been practicing this skill in a small way, without giving yourself credit for it. Every one of those 6 abandoned letters in your notes app was you trying to figure out how to build something deliberate out of a friendship that used to run on autopilot. You just haven't taken the last step of turning the private drafting into an actual outward act. That's not nothing, and it's not further behind than where most people start. Most people don't even get as far as writing the letter, abandoned or not. You've done the hardest internal part 6 times over. What's left is comparatively small: sending one message, picking one date, showing up once. I think there's also a quieter grief tangled up in this that's worth naming honestly, because you touched it and then moved past it fast. You chose not to have kids, and she is too, and even though you said the drift isn't anyone's fault, I suspect part of what you're mourning on that highway isn't just her specifically. It's the version of the friendship where your lives would have kept rhyming with each other automatically, the way they did at 11, at 22, at the wedding 2 years apart. Different major life choices don't just change how much free time two people have. They change the texture of what's urgent to each of you on any given day. Her days are organized around nap schedules and school forms, yours around things she may not even think to ask about anymore, because she's underwater in a way you aren't. That's not a betrayal on either side. It's just what happens when 2 lives that used to run parallel start running at different speeds, and I think part of you is grieving the effortlessness itself, not just her. I don't say this to suggest you're wrong to have chosen the life you chose, or that you should feel any ambivalence about not having kids. You were clear that it was a choice, and I take you at your word, and choosing differently from a close friend is not a betrayal of the friendship, even when it changes its shape. But it's worth being honest that divergent choices, even good ones, even ones neither of you regrets, still cost something in terms of shared texture. She can't fully explain a 3 a.m. feeding to you the way another mother could, and you can't fully explain whatever fills your evenings now to her, not because she wouldn't care, but because she's rarely had the uninterrupted attention left to receive it the way she once did. That gap isn't a flaw in either of you. It's just the honest price of 2 lives that used to be nearly identical branching in genuinely different directions, and grief is a completely reasonable response to a price like that, even when you'd make the same choice again, without hesitation. It's also worth being honest that you might be carrying more of the guilt than actually belongs to you. You described noticing the drift, feeling the grief, wondering if you're the only one who's noticed, but I'd bet real money she's had her own version of that highway moment, probably at a worse hour, probably with less time to sit in the feeling before a kid needed something. Parents of small children very often experience the same ache you're describing, just without the spare bandwidth to examine it the way you have, and sometimes without the words for it at all, because everything in their day is so loud that a quiet grief about a friendship can get buried under 100 louder, more urgent things. Don't mistake her silence for indifference. It may just be that she's currently underwater in a way that leaves no time to name what she's missing, even though she's missing it too. If you go into this bracing for a friend who's checked out, you may misread relief as reluctance when you finally do reach her, so go in expecting, instead, that you might just be the one who finally said out loud what you were both already quietly carrying alone. I'd also gently ask you to consider what her version of the highway exit might look like, because it's probably not a highway at all. For a mother of 2 small children, the equivalent moment is more likely to arrive at 11 at night, folding laundry after everyone's finally asleep, catching sight of an old photo of the 2 of you on a shelf and feeling the same wave you felt, except she has no spare 30 seconds of quiet driving to sit inside it, because the baby monitor crackles or the toddler calls out, and the feeling gets swallowed before she's even finished having it. Some people mistake a friend's silence for a smaller love, when it's often the opposite problem entirely, a love that's still just as large as it always was, with dramatically less room around it to be expressed. You had a whole grief-filled highway exit to yourself. She may be squeezing hers into the 90 seconds between finally sitting down and immediately falling asleep from exhaustion, and it would be a mistake to conclude from the different volume of the missing that the feeling underneath it is any different in size. So here's what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't send the big vulnerable text laying out the grief and the highway exit and, "Are we losing each other?" At least not first. That question, dropped on someone who's also drowning in a life with 2 small kids, can land as pressure rather than intimacy, even when it's meant with love, and if she doesn't have the bandwidth to meet it right then, you'll both walk away feeling worse, and even more convinced that this is too fragile to touch. Instead, I'd do something smaller and more concrete. Pick an actual date, not a "we should." An actual date, even if it's 3 weeks out, even if it's 90 minutes at a coffee shop between her kid's nap and yours. You don't have one, but you know what I mean, and put it on the calendar like it's real, because "we should get together" said fondly and never scheduled isn't a plan. It's a eulogy you keep almost writing. Be specific in how you propose it, too, because vague invitations are easy for an overwhelmed person to let slide, not out of reluctance, but simply because vagueness requires more effort to turn into an actual plan than she currently has to spare. "We should get coffee sometime" requires her to do the work of picking a time, checking childcare, and replying with a counterproposal, 3 separate small tasks she may keep meaning to get to and never quite reaching. "I have a sitter for my nephew's birthday thing that Saturday anyway, and I'll be near your exit. Can I swing by for 40 minutes around 2? Requires nothing from her but a yes or a no. Do the logistical thinking for both of you, at least this first time. It's not about letting her off the hook forever. It's about making the reunion easy enough to actually happen, because right now the bar you're both unconsciously setting for getting together is high enough that neither of you has cleared it in months. And when you're actually there, that's when the honest conversation belongs, not as an accusation but as an offer. Something closer to, "I miss you" in a specific way I didn't expect, and I don't think either of us did anything wrong. I think we just have to learn how to do this on purpose now, and I wanna if you do too. That sentence gives her an exit that isn't guilt and an entry that isn't performance. Most friendships that matter this much don't die from a single betrayal. They die from 2 people separately assuming the other one has stopped trying, when actually both of them are just waiting to be asked. You noticed first. That doesn't make you the only one who cares. It just makes you the one who has to send the text. I've heard from enough people, over enough years of writing about the unglamorous middle stretch of relationships, that I want to tell you the shape this usually takes when it goes well, because I don't think you've let yourself picture that outcome yet. Only the 2 bad ones, the friendship quietly dying, or an awkward conversation making things worse. The version I hear most often when someone actually sends the text goes something like this. The friend on the other end doesn't respond with confusion or defensiveness. She responds with something closer to relief, so immediate it's almost funny. "Oh my God, yes, I've been feeling exactly the same way, and didn't know how to say it without sounding like I was accusing you of disappearing on me." 2 people carrying the identical unspoken worry, each one convinced they were the only one who'd noticed, each one afraid of being the one who named it first. That's a far more common outcome than the one you're bracing for, and it's worth letting yourself hope for it rather than only rehearsing the version where she doesn't care as much as you do. I also want to address the "I don't know how to ask her which one it is" without sounding like I'm accusing her of something part of your letter directly, because I think that fear is doing a lot of work to keep you silent, and it deserves to be named on its own. There's a version of this conversation that does sound accusatory. Anything that starts with "you've been distant" or "you never text me back anymore" tends to land as a complaint about her, and complaints invite defensiveness even from people who love you. But there's another version, the one I described a moment ago, that isn't structured as an accusation at all. It's structured as a confession, leading with your own feeling rather than her behavior. I miss you is not an accusation. I drove past your exit and started crying a little, which surprised me, is not an accusation. Neither of those sentences requires her to defend anything, because neither of them claims she did something wrong. They just tell her something true about your own heart, and true things about your own heart are very hard for someone who loves you to receive as an attack, even when you're both a little out of practice with this kind of honesty. There's one more thing worth sitting with gently. It's possible this coffee date happens, and it's a little stilted at first. The easy rhythm doesn't snap right back after months of near silence, and you leave feeling like the effort didn't fully work. I want to prepare you for that so it doesn't read as proof the friendship is over. 20 years of shorthand doesn't disappear, but it does go a little rusty from disuse. The way a language you used to speak fluently gets clumsy in your mouth after enough time away, full of small pauses where you're both reaching for a reference that used to come automatically. Rusty is not the same as gone. It just means the second visit will likely be easier than the first, and the third easier still, the same way any relationship rebuilds. Awkwardly, then less awkwardly, then eventually it isn't work to be in a room together anymore. Don't let one imperfect reunion talk you back into thinking the highway exit feeling was wrong. I'd also let go of the idea that the friendship has to look like it used to in order to count as real. It won't be spontaneous anymore. It probably won't ever go back to showing up unannounced, or texting all day about nothing, and grieving that specific shape is fair, even necessary, but grieving the old shape isn't the same as losing the friendship, and I don't want you to confuse the two. A lot of adult friendships that survive long-term don't survive by staying the same. They survive by becoming something slower and more scheduled and, honestly, more deliberate than what came before, which sounds like a downgrade, and often isn't. I think of the effortless version and the deliberate version less as a hierarchy and more as two different seasons of the same friendship, each suited to a different chapter of two people's lives, neither one more real than the other just because it takes more planning. It's less a downgrade and more a friendship graduating into a form that can actually withstand real life, instead of one that only worked because real life hadn't fully arrived yet. A friendship someone has to actually choose on purpose, 90 scheduled minutes at a time, carries a kind of proof that the effortless version never had to offer. 20 years from now, we made time for each other even when it was hard, may end up meaning more to both of you than we never had to try ever did. And if a schedule feels too clinical for something that used to feel like family, reframe it instead as a standing appointment. The way you'd protect a doctor's visit or a haircut, non-negotiable precisely because it matters, not despite matching. The people who keep their most important friendships alive into their 40s and 50s are rarely the ones who never had to try. They're the ones who treated trying as a form of love rather than a sign the love had gone missing. One last practical thought, because I don't want this to become a single reunion that then quietly fades again the same way the friendship did the first time. Build in the next date before you leave the first one. Don't rely on either of you to circle back and initiate again from scratch, because that's the exact habit that got you here. Two people fond enough to always mean we should get together and distracted enough to never follow through. Before you say goodbye that first time, name the next one, even loosely. Let's do this again in a month is a wish. Let's do this again the second Saturday next month. Same time is a plan, and plans survive busy seasons in a way wishes don't. It doesn't have to be elaborate, coffee, a walk with the kids in tow, even a phone call while she's driving somewhere and you're doing dishes. The format matters far less than the fact that it recurs, on purpose, without either of you having to remember to ask. That's this week's letter.
I've Mia. Talk soon.